Okay, this is video 3 in the set of training videos, and this video is to create center lines for a dig. Now in the previous video I was looking at plot 1, which we're going to continue with, and we're going to create center lines between this inner line and the outer line, which is the dig channel effectively. What I'm going to do very quickly is I'm just going to select this layer, which is the CC hatch layer, and I'm going to turn it off for now because that's just going to get in the way. Alternatively, I could actually lock the layer, which means it shows but you can't edit it, and it sort of slightly goes grayed out more, but I'm going to turn it off because we don't need to show it at all. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is actually find out the distance between the two lines, and you can do that by going to utilities, and under utilities you've got measure. Now I think most of you guys will have measure under utilities, and you want distance from under that, and it's basically if you click on the downward triangle, you've got distance there. So we want to select that, select our first corner point. And before I go into measuring the line, it's probably worthwhile talking you through the object snaps, which actually show up when you're looking at a drawing and you're hovering over. So you can see I've got a square here, which is endpoint. If I go more towards the middle, I get a triangle, which is midpoint. There's all sorts of other sort of little icons that you get when you're looking and hovering over a drawing. Now, the easiest way to get onto these object snaps is to, on the keyboard, hold down Shift and right click on the mouse, and you'll see you get a dialog box coming up which shows you all the object snaps that you can have. And usually I try and set up my object snap settings, so down at the bottom you've got that option, and I can see when I go into that I've got endpoint, midpoint, center, node, intersection, extension, insertion. All of these are actually current. Now I don't need a lot of these when I'm creating my center line for a dig. I certainly don't need extension. I don't need insertion, because insertion is for blocks that you've got within the drawing, and we're not worried about that. Intersection might be worthwhile if we've got two lines which sort of bisect each other, and node is useful because when we create a point later, points use nodes for snapping too, so we need to leave that one on because it's going to be very useful for finding out our ID points later. Center point is for circles, and we haven't got any of those within our dig, so we don't need that one on, but we can always come back later and turn it on if we need to, using the Shift and right click on your keyboard and mouse. So once that's done, we can then go back into our drawing, and it's carrying on with our distance calculation, because you can see down on the command prompt that it's saying select first point or specify first point. So I'm going to specify the endpoint here, and actually what I should have done, I'm going to Shift and right click again. I want perpendicular, because at the moment if I measure from endpoint to endpoint, I get a measurement of 636.396, which is not particularly useful because half of that wouldn't give me half of the actual width of the dig line. So I'm going to go endpoint to perpendicular, and you can see perpendicular is this sort of it's like a corner symbol. So that's what I want, and I can see that is distance of 450. Now that's kind of 450 millimeters. That's how this drawing's been set up, but it could be 450 units of any measurement at all. It could be 45 if that was meters. If the units were set as meters, it might be 445 rather than 450, or it might be 45 centimeters rather. But this is a millimeters drawing, so we know that our unit that we're going to set has to be, so our offset rather, between these two lines, the midpoint or centre line of the dig is going to be 225 millimeters. So what we can do there is we can either draw a line from the end point to the perpendicular, and that will be and we can then take the midpoint of that line down. But the easiest way of creating a centre line for a dig is to use existing lines like these two and offset them. Now offset is available under the there's an icon here which is offset, or you can do modify and offset, and you can also type in O on the keyboard, select that from there. Now I'm going to say, right, what it's doing is asking me offset, specify offset distance, and we know that we want 225, so type that in on the keyboard, hit return, and then it's saying, right, which object do you want to offset? Now I normally offset the inner line. You could choose the outer line, it doesn't really matter a great deal, but I think it's easier, you can see what you're doing more. But so when you hover over the line, you can see that it sort of highlights. So we want to select that line, pull to the left of that line. You can see that it's showing you what you're creating as you go. So if you went to the right of the line, you'd create an offset line outside of the dig line. So you want to pull it to the left, and that will create the line. Now what you'll find is that when you create an offset line, it uses the same properties of that line and creates a line that's offset from that with the same properties. But we probably want it on our center line. So I'm going to highlight that. And instead of being CC foundation, I want to come down here and actually change it to center line. You can see that actually our center line then gains the properties of that layer. So it's actually on a center line type as well. So I'm going to just go around this plot here and offset a few more of the lines, over offset. Now you'll see that the specify offset distance is already defaults to 225. Now in this instance I know that the line from here to here is 450 because I've measured it earlier, but if you weren't absolutely sure, it's worth measuring from the midpoint to the perpendicular of that line, and then you can see whether it's the same or not. But I know it is, so I'm going to cheat, and I'm going to do the same for that line, and also the same for this line coming down here. So we've got all of our offset lines created. What you'll notice is that, again, they're on the wrong layer, but also the lines are joined together. And that's because these lines here that we've used, there and there, are polylines, so they're sort of joined together, and the way to get around that is to explode them, and that is the you can either modify explode, or you can hit X on the keyboard, and you'll see that when you type X it gives you a number of options. So we want explode, which is right at the top, and we can select this line here which shows you all of the line that you're exploding, and we also want to explode that line. And what you'll find is that then the lines are individual, which means that we can edit the lines. What I did there is I deleted a line because there were sort of two lines, one underneath the other, because I knew that this line here created an offset line up there, and also this line here created the same line. So I just deleted it. You don't have to delete it, it's just for my purposes. So we can now go into these lines and we can change them, go up to there, up to the layer dialog box, and change that to center line. But we can also use the match properties dialog box, and we can select that. About that, and we can say, right, which properties do we want to copy? So I'm going to select this line here, and then it says, right, which lines do you want to actually gain those properties? So we want that line, that line, that line, that line, that line, and that line. This is just a slightly different way of changing the properties. You could select them all and just before you use a command and then go up to centerline. But change properties or match properties is quite a useful one to use. Now what you'll find is that when you offset some of these lines, some of the areas that you need points at don't actually close up and form a corner. And the easiest way of creating that corner is to fillet these lines together. And that again is under modify, and where are we? Fillet. You can also extend lines and you can trim them, but for now we're going to use fillet. And you can also type F on the keyboard and you get the fillet option. And what you also get is, under your command line here, you get the options of creating a polyline, changing the radius, trimming, and you get multiple fillets. So you can select multiple if you want to do more than one fillet at any one time. What we're going to do is we're going to check the radius, and you can see under our fillet, which is sort of grayed out above that command line, our radius at the moment is 0. Now if you wanted to change the radius, you can type R, as it shows you here, and then it says, right, specify the fillet radius, so we could change that to 10. But in this instance we don't need to have that change, so we're just going to say 0. And then we select the two lines that we want to fillet, or we can select M for multiple and select more than those two lines, so we can select that line and that line. Usually you want to select it close to the end of the line, and as you hover over it shows you what it's actually going to do for you. So we've got that one which we've filleted, we've got the corner there. We can do the same with that one. Okay, so I hadn't exploded this line up the top here, so I need to undo, which is U, or you can select the backwards arrow up here, which does the same thing. Okay, so I need to explode that line. So I'll select that, hit X for explode, and that explodes that line. So you can do it you can explode lines in two ways. You can either select the line and then hit explode, or you can select explode and then select the line. Not all of them work that way, but that's the explode is quite useful in that respect. So I'll go back into fillet, select my two lines. Now what I didn't do that time is I didn't select multiple, so with the fillet command it just gives you one command at a time, and then it actually exits out. So we can change that, go back into fillet, M for multiple, and we're going to do fillet multiple times. Fillet all of these corners so we can get points from them. So that is pretty much done. I'm happy with that. So that what we've created there is all our center lines for our dig using the offset command. The offset command is quite useful because if you imagine drawing a line, you would have to find out what the actual angle of this line is, and you'd either have to draw it at that angle, so you'd have to create an angle line to draw, or you could copy the existing line and move it down. But normally when you draw a line, you've got ortho, which is this sort of allows you to draw vertically or horizontally on. Otherwise, if you've got ortho off, which is F8 on the keyboard, it doesn't lock to any particular angle, which is not particularly useful. So you would be sort of drawing by eye effectively. So using the offset command, you're offsetting the line exactly in the same rotation, if you like, the same angle, so you don't have to worry about creating a line in that way. So offset is always a good one to use for creating center lines for a dig. Okay, that's the end of that one.